Chapter 1. Ashes of Failure. The reek of warp oil and filth hung thick in the tunnels of Skavenblight, slithering through the dark like a living thing. Torch flames flickered green, their light warped and unnatural, throwing jagged shadows against the rune-scarred stone walls. Verrik of Clan Eshin crept through them with unnatural grace, the folds of his dark cloak hissing like a whispering snake behind him. He was silent, unseen, until he wasn't. Warp bells clanged in the distance, the clangor shrill and chaotic. Somewhere above, the screech of a disemboweled slave echoed through the warrens. Verrik didn't flinch. He'd heard it all before. He'd done it before. His black-gloved claw gripped the hilt of his curved assassin blade, not from caution, but habit. He always expected a knife from the dark. That was the Scave way. He moved swiftly, body low and tail curled close to avoid detection. The mission had gone wrong, though not by his doing. It was never his doing. Screech should be dead, should be ashes in the wind, should have drowned in his own blood. Verrik had seen the knife strike true, deep into the jugular, cutting tendon and windpipe with surgical precision. He'd watched the life drain from those red, rage-maddened eyes. So why had the warband runners returned screaming, "Screek lives! Screek lives! He comes, claws sharpened for vengeance, blood!" Verrik's snout twitched with fury and dread. His mind reeled. He'd returned to the city early, reported success, even been given a temporary den in the bone tier of Clan Eshin's compound. He'd sharpened his claws and cleaned his gear with the smug air of a killer who had climbed one rung higher on the endless treacherous ladder. Now that rung had snapped. The door to the chamber creaked open, revealing a circular council room adorned with flickering warp lamps and a ring of spiked columns. Slaves hung in iron cages between them, some dead, others twitching, rats gnawing at their toes. In the center stood the silhouette of Warlord Screek, unmistakable even through the warp mist. His body was a wreck of scars, his throat wrapped in crude warp thread stitches, one eye now covered in a metal clamp, his fur burnt in patches. But he stood tall, breathing, living. Verrik froze. "Verra kill thing," Screek snarled through broken teeth. "Thought you finish end me, yes. But Screek too strong. Pitiful stab worm like you." He spat a thick glob of blood and bile on the stone floor. It sizzled. The surrounding assassins, hooded, robed, and silent, watched with beady eyes glinting in the green light. Their paws never left their belts or blades. A high-ranking voice of the council, one with a cowl of black silk and a venom-fanged symbol stitched into his chest, hissed a command. Tell, Verrik. Tell how Screek mark kill confirmed, stands before us with throat cut, and hate-hatin' eyes. Verrik bared his teeth, tail flicking, eyes darting across the room. 1,000 escape plans ran through his mind, but none led to survival. "I saw him fall, Master Voice," Verrik lied with a snarl. "Blade true struck, blood spilled like bubbling soup. He twitched, then still. Stone still. Then why live, breathe he still," hissed another, stepping from the shadows with twin daggers glistening. "You mistake fail or lie deceive." "Maybe yes, maybe no," Verrik growled, shifting his stance. "Maybe Screek has allies, dark things, molder, pestilence, even stranger breeds. Maybe he rose risen with help magic. Not my failing, not liar hiss," Screek barked, coughing blood. "You turned traitor. Tried to climb over me, failed dung. Kill him now. The council murmured, debating in clicks and snarls. Verrik saw no salvation. He dropped a smoke globe at his feet, crackling green fog exploding outward. Chaos. Screeches echoed as Verrik vanished into the haze, blades slicing as he slipped through bodies, cutting a path in crimson arcs. He opened throats, slit bellies, left intestines coiling on the floor like dead eels. One brother lethal tried to stop him, got a dagger through the eye for his trouble. Blood sprayed across the stone walls in a fan of hot mist. Verrik sprinted through the choking green fog, sliding into a drainage pipe and disappearing into the filth water below. He skittered blind for what felt like hours, heart pounding like a trapped warp engine. Eventually he collapsed in a forgotten burrow, lungs burning, hands shaking, cloaked in blood not all his own. Screek lives, council sees. They saw, he muttered to himself, claws twitching. They plot now, hunt chase, must flee, must rise anew. In the darkness his mind churned. He would not be caught again. Not as a failure. Not as prey. No. Verrik would find another way. A new name, a new warband. He would rise, and next time, Screek wouldn't crawl back. Chapter 2. Before the Black Council. They came for Verrik in the dark, as expected. He'd barely slept since Screek's return, burrowed deep into the wretched lower warrens of Skavenblight like a tick hiding in rotted flesh. His mind raced constantly, dreams thick with betrayal, hallucinations of red eyes in the dark, of Screek's torn throat coughing vengeance through stitches and spite. He had no illusions. Failure among the Skaven was a death mark branded in blood. He should have fled long ago. Should have dug deeper, down into the roach pits, or fled the city entirely. But some sick part of him clung to the idea that he could still twist this, manipulate the chaos into a weapon of survival. Maybe even redemption. Then came the chittering. They slipped in like smoke, 8 cloaked assassins, silent save for the glint of their poisoned blades and the rhythmic scratch of clawed feet. No words, no warning. Verrik awoke to the sting of paralyzing venom laced into a needle knife pressed to his neck. One rasped into his ear, time to see the Black Council. False thing. The path to the council chambers wound through the deepest arteries of Clan Eshen's domain, hidden far beneath the rotting sinew of Skavenblight. Verrik stumbled with every forced step, still woozy from the poison. The guards said nothing, just watched him with glittering dead eyes. 2 warp rats, snarled behind him, kept on tight leashes of flayed tendon. The tunnels stank of incense, rot, and murder. The walls were lined with skulls, some rat-like, others disturbingly not. Vermin priests chanted as they passed, clawing symbols into the walls with bleeding fingertips. One hissed a blessing that made Verrik's teeth ache. Then the chamber. A vast circle hollowed into black stone, its floor a writhing mass of shadows and bones. 13 thrones loomed in a ring, each draped in shrouds of silk, skulls, and poisoned relics. The Council of Assassins, masked and robed in darkness, stared down with malice so pure it could curdle stone. The central figure rose. The voice of knives. His mask was carved from the skull of a horned rat beast, his breath reeking of venom-laced fungus. Verrik failure, the voice rasped, every word like a needle dragged across bone. You claimed. Screek was kill-dead. But he lives, breathes still, throat sliced, yet screaming vengeance. You insult, mock us all. Verrik tried to kneel but was forced flat, face mashed to the cold stone floor by a booted claw. I saw death, I swear. Swear, Verrik hissed through broken teeth. His blood ran hot, his eyes rolled back, body corpse limp. Then he rose again. Yes, the voice cackled. So is Verrik failure, or Verrik liar, traitor. The other council members murmured, sharp tails twitching, claws tapping metal with unsettling rhythm. Another voice, higher, shriller, from a lean figure draped in shadows, snarled, Maybe Verrik planned betrayal, spare Screek to ally scheme, ambition burns him, kill slice now. A chorus of hisses agreed. Skaven do not forgive failures, hissed another. gnawing at a bone-handled dagger. Not even clever failures. The voice raised a claw. Silence. But Verrik did try. Blade did strike. Death did near. He clicked his teeth. So not traitor, but failure. Verrik's heart stopped. Failure. To be called traitor meant glorious death, or the chance to counter-accuse, maybe even backstab your way out. Failure? That was worse. That was uselessness. No worth to kill, no pride in surviving. Just contempt, an empty title, a ghost. You were stripped of name, rank, climb, denied kill orders, no den, no clan. Let the Warrens devour what is left of you. A long pause, then the whisper of blades being drawn. Verrik didn't wait. He bit hard into the sack hidden beneath his tongue, a suicide poison meant for moments like this. But Verrik had altered the recipe. He wasn't dying today. The chamber exploded into a cloud of choking warp smoke, toxic green fog that blinded and seared the eyes, even through filters. Screeches erupted. Treachery, death poison. Verrik surged up, daggers drawn, slicing the throat of his nearest escort. Hot blood sprayed across the floor, steaming in the acidic mist. The next one lunged, got a blade through his ribs, twitching and vomiting blood. Verrik ducked low, rolling under slashing claws, throwing a warp rat bomb from his pouch. It exploded in a cloud of razored fur and gnashing teeth. 3 mutant warp rats, engineered for berserk frenzy, tore into the closest assassin like living blunders. Claws tore through bone, fur flew, someone's skull cracked like an egg. The screams were glorious. Verrik ran. He flung himself down a shadow chute, an escape route he'd memorized seasons ago, back when he still had favor. He skidded down a slimy shaft, bounced off a rusted pipe, and landed hard in a sewage trench, tail half numb. He didn't look back. Hours later, soaked in blood and bile, Verrik emerged into the forgotten sub-burrows, ruins of a time even the Skaven had abandoned. Cracked statues of vermin gods loomed over him, their faces worn to madness. He sat, shaking, covered in ash and ichor. Not a traitor. A failure. Worse. But still alive. And that would be enough for now. Chapter 3. Burrows Below. Verrik bled from 5 places. 2 stab wounds, 1 claw gouge across the chest, a missing patch of tail, and a gash from where he'd slid down a barbed waist chute. The wound on his thigh oozed pussular, pulsing in time with his panicked heartbeat. But he didn't stop. Couldn't. His claws scrambled along the slime-slick tunnel walls, half crawling, half staggering through the forgotten arteries of Skaven blight. These were the below burrows, old cursed veins of the city, no longer mapped, no longer patrolled, where madness and mutation bred like flies in a corpse's mouth. And they suited Verrik just fine. The walls wept green moisture. Sludge oozed underfoot, warm with the rot of 1,000 generations. Every footfall echoed like a scream in the stillness. Pipes groaned with ancient, unknowable agony overhead. Occasionally a rusted grate would clatter shut for no reason, sending vermin skittering into deeper holes. Verrik flinched at every noise. That sound. Tail drag? No, just sludge. That shape in the fog. Watching me? No. Yes. Was that whisper a voice? A blade? The council's spies? My thoughts? His dagger was never sheathed now. He slept with it clenched in 1 claw and a jagged poison dart held in his teeth. He didn't sleep much. His mind boiled in its own juices. Backstabbers everywhere, he muttered as he scurried into a collapsed tunnel that stank of stale warpstone. Even when alone. Shadows whisper secrets. They tell lies to the walls. The shadows didn't argue. Sometimes he thought he saw faces, red eyes blinking from cracks in the stone, gnawing maws with too many teeth grinning behind sewer grates. Once he screamed at a heap of discarded armor, convinced it was moving. He stabbed it 17 times before he realized it was rusted solid. Another time he found an Eshin corpse nailed to the ceiling by its own intestines, tail coiled around its throat like a noose. No tracks, no signs of struggle. Just a message. You are being watched. The worst was the dripping. Always the dripping. From walls, from ceilings, from unseen things that breathed in the dark. It became rhythmic, tick, 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 like a heartbeat, like the ticking of a countdown. He ripped apart a rat thing once, thinking it was a spy. He opened its belly and chewed through its guts with his claws, looking for the warp lens or rune mark. Nothing. Just meat. Just blood. So much blood. He still smelled it on his fur. After what felt like days, weeks, he collapsed in a tunnel choked by rotting roots and black mold. The air was damp and heavy with the stench of warp gas and ancient decay. Bone piles lined the walls, rat, goblin, even the glint of man-skull. Something ancient had died here. Many somethings. He curled into a ball, tail tight, blade pressed to his chest, panting. Blood dripped from his wounds into the muck. He whispered to himself in a near-silent litany. Not failure. No, no. Was close kill. Blade true, true. Counsel wrong, wrong. Lies, lies everywhere. Even in my own mind. Suddenly, movement. A skitter. A breath. He spun, blade flashing, only to face empty air and fungus spores. His own heartbeat slammed like a war drum in his ears. Then he heard it, a whisper. Very it. It came from nowhere and everywhere. It sounded like Screek, but twisted, wet, wheezing, stitched. Or maybe it was his own voice now. Maybe the walls were talking. He stabbed the air, then the wall, then the dirt, then his own leg. Just to be sure. At last he crawled into an old crypt, a forgotten chapel of the horned rat, long defiled. The altar had collapsed, bones scattered across the warp-tiled floor. Green fungus bloomed in the eye sockets of statues. He claimed it. His new den. Low, deep, forgotten, where shadows lingered like lovers and screams were never answered. And there, surrounded by rot and ghosts, Verrik plotted. I am not fail-thinking. I will rise, yes, yes, climb again, but smart, clever, hide, hunt, replace face, new name, new warband. Yes! The whisper returned, almost gently now. Yes, but no one was there. Chapter 4. Vermintide of Memory. The southern wastelands were not made for life. They were where life ended, screaming, rotting, swallowed by warp radiation, foul winds, and the endless grind of desolate, broken earth. The sun, when it showed, burned wrong, sickly pale or bleeding red, like a diseased eye staring down with malice. Verrik wandered these killing lands now, little more than bone, claw, and trembling paranoia in a cloak that reeked of old poison and dried blood. His wounds had festered, his left leg dragged with a warped limp. Every skittering insect made him twitch, every shadow was Screek reborn, every gust of wind a whisper of mockery. Verrik, the wind said. Clawfang Verrik. Sometimes he'd answer it. Screaming, weeping, laughing. Other times he just sank his dagger into whatever moved. He came upon the warband by accident, or perhaps drawn by the scent of desperation and decay. A dozen or more skaven corpses lay strewn across a broken camp on the edge of a warpstone-laced chasm. Their tents had been torn to shreds, their banners clawed down, their weapons scattered like broken teeth. Blood painted everything. dried in black arcs, sprayed across stones, soaked into soil still twitching from exposure. It wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. Verrik moved like a shadow among the dead, blade raised. He didn't speak, didn't breathe louder than a whisper. His tail coiled tightly, claws flexed, ears twitching. Then he heard it. A low, wet gurgle. It's still alive. He found the survivor half buried beneath a splintered whelp wagon. One arm was gone, torn off at the elbow. His snout was caved in, and his guts hung in loops from a gash across his midsection, glistening in the sickly light. Yet he clung to life, whispering the same name over and over again. Rask, Rask. Verrik crouched close. What is Rask? Little dying thing. The dying Skaven hissed blood through broken teeth. Warband leader. Took us to raid dwarf caravans. Thought they were weak, weren't. His eyes rolled back. Verrik stood over him, twitching. He'd seen symbols etched into their shattered banners. A minor clan. Clawfang. Not prestigious, not feared. Barely even noticed. Perfect. He waited 3 days in that corpse camp, feeding on rotting meat and boiling warp rats for nourishment. He watched the skies, waited for scavengers, waited for others. And they came. 4. No more. Survivors. Emaciated, limping, wounded, and confused. They approached the massacre cautiously, sniffing the air, weapons drawn. Verrik had already poisoned the corpse of the survivor, watched as one of the new arrivals knelt and bit into the rotting meat, too hungry to care. Within seconds, his throat swelled like a bloated leech. He dropped, screaming, clawing at his neck until his windpipe burst and he choked on his own bile. The other 3 panicked. Verrik shrugged. He moved through the smoke fog like vengeance incarnate, daggers out, teeth bared. One tried to flee. Verrik slit his Achilles tendon and drove a blade through the back of his head while he screamed in the dirt. Another tried to fight. Verrik parried a weak swipe, grabbed the Skaven's own blade, and shoved it through his ear canal until it scraped stone. The last survivor dropped his weapon and fell to his knees, tail limp. "I submit, serve, please." Verrik smiled, thin and broken and wide. "You do now. That night, surrounded by the corpses of Clawfang, Verrik donned the blood-soaked scraps of their warlords' armor. It barely fit. He didn't care. He painted new symbols over the old with warlock blood and ash. He draped himself in bones, in barbs, in symbols of the horned rat, twisted, broken symbols. And then he whispered his lie. "I am Rask now." The last survivor bowed so low his snout scraped bone. "Rask leads us, yes." Verrik's eyes burned in the dark. "No, Verrik is dead. Rask rises. From failure, from filth, from madness." Chapter 5. Mask of Clawfang. The ruins of the Clawfang warband's old den lay cracked and festering in the undercrofts of the southern wastelands, a jagged nest of twisted tunnels and fungus-choked chambers built atop a long, collapsed dwarfen aqueduct. It stank of failure, of rot and cowardice, of meat gone cold and power squandered. Verrik intended to burn that stink out with blood and bile. He'd already claimed the survivors, broken wretches with haunted eyes and twitching tails. They whispered his false name now. Rask, the returned. Rask, chosen by the horned rat. He wore a stitched half-mask carved from bone and wrapped in wire, giving his face the angular leer of a demon. His real features, the ones that still carried the shame of Verrik, stayed hidden beneath it. But one obstacle remained. Snick's reach. The current Clawfang leader, a hunched, mange-ridden husk of a warlord, who hadn't led a raid in 3 cycles. His fur was missing in patches, skin covered in weeping boils. He coughed more than he spoke, and the only reason he still breathed was because no one beneath him had dared to slit his throat yet. Until now. Verrik found him wallowing in the pit chamber, surrounded by his pet gnars, blind, inbred warp rats half the size of goblins. They hissed and spat as Verrik entered, the smell of poison and old death clinging to him like perfume. Snyxrech's milky eyes blinked, one crusted nearly shut. "You, back, he wheezed, claws clutched around a moldy fungus loaf. "Was thinking you chewed dead like all the others." Verrik didn't answer, just watched, waited, measured the wobble in the old rat's neck. Snyxrech chuckled, a phlegm-filled rattle. "Came to lick serve, eh? Good. I need new blade claws, useful things." Verrik stepped forward. "I came for command." Snyxrech froze. One of his blind gnars screeched. "What say, insolent? Bite you are. You challenge me, yes. "No," Verrik replied, voice low and venom smooth. "I replace you." Snyxrech rose unsteadily, claws flaring. Then die squeal like all the others. He lunged sickeningly fast for his condition. A curved blade shimmered in his claws, poisoned edge hissing through the air. But Verrik was already inside his reach. A hidden stiletto slid into Snyxrech's gut just under the rib. Not deep enough to kill outright, that wasn't the plan. The old rat shrieked, swinging wildly. Verrik danced aside, slicing his thigh tendon. Snyxrech crumpled, gurgling, bile leaking from his lips. The nonners leapt toward Verrik. He hurled a rot bomb. Oomph. A blast of acidic gas and shards turned the rats into twitching, screeching puddles. Snyxrech tried to crawl. Verrik followed, step by slow step. No escape, no mercy, no more weakness, filth thing, he hissed. Snyxrech turned, eyes wide, teeth bared in panic. "I was chosen. I saw the rat's face. He spoke. So did I." Verrik stabbed his second blade into Snyxrech's throat, slowly. The blade entered with a wet crunch, slid through cartilage and airways. Blood fountained up, hot and black-red. Snyxrech's legs kicked once, twice, then nothing. Verrik stood over the twitching corpse and raised his claws. Witness this. The horned rat has spoken to me. Me!" The chamber echoed with the gasps and snarls of the warband. They'd gathered in the shadows, watching, waiting for a winner, waiting for a master. "I am Rask, his chosen claw. He sent visions, fire, death. Weak-lead thing failed, and now I rise. You follow, or you die like him." The warband hesitated. One bold rat stepped forward, young, eyes sharp. "Proof. Give truth foof of your rat blessing." Verrik hurled something at the young rat's feet. Snyxrech's heart, still warm, still pumping slightly. "I took this from a warlord's chest. Is that proof enough?" The young one dropped to his knees. "Yes, Rask leader. Horned one favors you." The rest followed. One by one. Bow. Kneel. Obey. That night, Verrik, now Rask, sat atop Snyxrech's corpse throne. He gnawed meat with a smile beneath his mask, tail lazily swaying, eyes watching everything. In the shadows, whispers started again, not voices, just memory. Paranoia. Screek still hunts. The council remembers. The claws will come. Verrik closed his eyes. Let them. I kill first now. Chapter 6. Warp and Warlords. The Clawfang den was no longer silent. It snarled, hissed, and plodded in its tunnels once more. The weak had been culled, the doubters fed to blades, to rats, or to Verrik's own twisted poisons. The warband was rebuilding, not from strength, but from hunger. Hunger for warpstone. Hunger for purpose. Hunger for a leader who could win. and Verrik Rask fed them that hunger. He carved a new symbol into every shield, every chest plate, every shrine, a clawed rat's skull over a warpstone flame. The new Clawfang. His Clawfang. "Riches, raid loot, warchide for all," he shrieked from atop the meatstone in the central pit. "Follow Rask, yes, yes, kill crush goblins, flay men things, and the horn rat will rain favor upon your worthless hides." They screeched their agreement, but he saw the eyes that lingered too long. The ones that didn't cheer, the ones that twitched wrong. Spies. He'd deal with them soon. The first raid was against a goblin caravan heading toward the Black Gulf. Verrik led it personally, his cloak soaked in venom, his blades whisper-sharp. The Clawfang warband came in howling through the dunes under the cover of dusk, rats riding mutated wolf rats, others slinking through the sand with sabers and jagged cleavers. The goblins never stood a chance. Their crude wagons burned. Their squigs were gutted and eaten raw by blood-mad vermin. Screams filled the air as claws tore open bellies, and skavens squealed in triumph as they pulled shining green warpstone pebbles from under scorched hides and rusted iron boxes. One goblin tried to crawl away. Verrik followed. He stabbed a curved blade through the creature's leg, pinning it to the sand. "We'll hide more shine rocks," he hissed, eyes wild. "What we traded most. South, south. Human men," the goblin wailed. Verrik grinned and peeled the skin from its face. Too slow. The second raid was bloodier. A patrol of the border princes, 6 men at arms, 2 knights, and a caravan of trade goods meant for a frontier keep. Clawfang struck at night, crawling up through a dried riverbed like a wave of fur and teeth. Verrik led the charge, face masked, blades already slicked with goblin grease. The humans fought hard. Too hard. One knight killed 5 rats before Verrik brought him down, dodging a broadsword swing, sliding under a rearing horse, and planting a serrated hook blade in the man's groin. He dragged the knight down, ripping his throat open with his teeth while screaming, "Bleed! Bleed for Rask!" When the dust settled, the caravan was theirs. Blood stained the earth. The corpses were already being dismembered for storage or consumption. And yet, something gnawed at him. Why had the patrol been waiting? Why were the humans so well prepared? Why did one of his own scouts turn up after the fight, panting, not a scratch on him? Spies. He said nothing aloud, only watched. Later that night, he called that scout into his tent. "You late, too late. Why?" The scout stammered. "Lost in sand dunes, confused. No trick lie?" Verrik smiled. "I believe you." The scout relaxed. Then Verrik blew a needle from a bone tube into his neck. The rat spasmed violently, frothing green at the mouth as his muscles locked and convulsed. Verrik watched with a detached curiosity. Now, if lie Lee, body will melt, yes. If true, only hurts." The scout melted, screamed until his lungs became sludge. The stench was horrid. Verrik nodded. "It's liar." Over the following weeks, Clawfang grew fat on blood and spoils. Verrik made sure his warband believed they were the chosen, blessed by the horned rat himself. He held ceremonies where he heard whispers from the shadows. He had runes carved in warpstone and smeared with rat blood. Every lie layered atop the next until truth was impossible to find. But with each victory, his paranoia deepened. He heard voices behind walls, saw movement in shadows where none should be. He began to sleep in 3 separate dens, never the same one twice. He laid traps in his bedding, poisoned his own rations, then ate after watching others eat first. He killed 4 more suspected spies. One had been entirely innocent. Another might have been his best scout, It didn't matter. They twitched and screamed the same when skinned alive. Better safe than dead. One night, as he stood atop the hill of the latest battlefield, warpstone burning in the blood-soaked mud below, Verrik whispered to the wind, "They think they plot. They dream of betrayal. I dream sharper. I kill sooner. Let them come." And the wind replied, a whisper, low, familiar. Verrik. Chapter 7. Rats in a Pit. Trust is poison in the Under-Empire. For weeks, Verrik had felt the shift, like a warp current running counter to his will. Eyes lingered too long on his back. Whispers curdled the air as he passed. Murmured plans died too quickly when he entered a room. Even the stupidest of his underlings seemed to be avoiding his gaze, tails tucked and movements twitching with guilt. It wasn't a question of if someone would try to kill him, only when. The betrayer came from within, the one who had licked his claws clean at Verrik's table, who had marched at his side through the Border Prince bloodfields, whose loyalty was once the sharpest fang in the Clawfang maw. Screek the Daggertail. Tall, lean, and fast, Screek was a killer, the type that didn't blink when slicing a rival's throat, and didn't flinch when burying a poisoned blade in a sleeping mate. Verrik had respected that, had used that, until he heard Screek's name whispered in the wrong tunnel at the wrong time. Not by an enemy, but by two very dead spies Verrik had skinned earlier that week. They'd left behind a sigil burned into rat-hide parchment, a triangle of teeth with a jagged tail, Screek's old warband. And that was enough. He didn't confront Screek. That would have been sloppy. Instead, he planted a sealed bone scroll in Screek's nest cave, its script scrawled in the tongue of Clan Screer, an imaginary alliance promising warp tech in exchange for Verrik's death. He leaked rumors to loyal tunnel rats that Screek was seen speaking to a Molderbeast handler, that Warpstone had gone missing from Verrik's private vaults. He even ordered his own food poisoned, then had it accidentally served to Screek's three closest allies. Two convulsed and choked to death. The third survived just long enough to gasp. "Screek told us. Safe, safe." The web tightened. Verrik waited until the stink of suspicion was thick. Then he sprung it. He called a war council under the guise of planning another raid on man-things. The chamber was dimly lit, walls covered in spikes and bone trophies. Warp flame torches flickered green and blue, casting long shadows across snarling rat faces. Screek sat near the edge of the pit dais, flanked by the few who still thought he could lead. Verrik stood tall, masked, his voice sharp as a fresh-honed dagger. "Today we plan slaughter, right? But first, purge, traitors." Silence. Then screams. Hidden blades were drawn. Two of Screek's lieutenants were seized instantly by Verrik's hidden agents, rats he'd bribed with promises of warpstone and rank. Their throats were slashed open in front of the crowd. Red mist sprang across the bone floors. Screek leapt to his feet, claws drawn. "Lies, trickery," he shrieked. Verrik raised a claw. "I found this in your nest den." He hurled the forged scroll at Screek's feet. The crowd gasped, tails flicking wildly. No one questioned the writing, no one cared. The evidence existed. That was enough. Screek knew. He lunged for Verrik, and Verrik was ready. They clashed in a blur of blades, claws screeched across armor. Screek's dagger carved a chunk from Verrik's shoulder, but Verrik's poison fang blade buried itself in Screek's gut. Once, twice, 3 times. Screek dropped, gurgling, blood frothing from his jaws. Verrik crouched beside him, hissing low. "You should have killed me, when you had chance, traitor." Screek laughed, bubbling gore. Screek watches. Then his head was gone, taken clean off with a savage arc of Verrik's curved saber. Blood sprayed the crowd. Rats squealed in triumph and terror. Verrik turned to the others. "No more plot scheme. I rule. You follow or you die," screech like him. They bowed, teeth bared, eyes low. He saw the fear in their faces. He savored it. That night, Verrik fed Skirk's corpse to his pet warp rats. He watched them chew through muscle, snap bone, tear sinew, and still he heard the whisper. Screek watches. He slept with both eyes open. Chapter 8. Under the Moonfang banner. The wasteland shuddered beneath the clawed footfalls of war. Where once there had been only scattered scavenger bands, fractured warrens and bickering ratkins scraping over scraps, there now spread a growing shadow, a banner torn from bone and stitched in flayed skin. Upon it, painted in warp oil and mutant blood, gleamed a crude sigil, a snarling rat skull eclipsed by a fang-marked moon. Moonfed. The new name whispered through the tunnels, across poisoned winds and cracked stone. The Moonfang Clawhold had been born, and at its heart, masked and merciless, stood Verrik. His rise was not won through promises. It was bought in warpstone and paid for in skulls. The first to fall was the Rustwhisker mob, diseased mongrels clinging to the ruins of an abandoned mine. Verrik didn't parley. He poisoned their war leaders' food stores with rust fungus. By the time they realized, their bellies had swollen like drowned ticks, and half were screaming blood through every orifice. Verrik arrived as they begged for mercy. He gave them a choice. Follow, or I salt your warrens with warp spores and laugh while your kits claw out their own eyes. They bent the knee, tails dragging in submission. The next were the spineback fangs, tunnel fighters and trappers infamous for their jagged steel nets and toxin-laced barbs. Their leader, Wretch Wrath, demanded tribute in warpstone and the right to duel Verrik for dominance. So Verrik accepted, and poisoned the duel pit. As Wretch Wrath stepped into the ring, Verrik's agents triggered a release of gas harvested from corpse beetles, sweet-scented and paralyzing. The spineback warlord collapsed mid-charge, twitching and foaming. Verrik stepped forward and cut his ears off before opening his throat, all while the onlooking spineback screamed and groveled. Wretchwat was weak. He choked on fear. Verrik hissed, "Follow me now, or I flay your litters and feed them to cave flies." They obeyed. Verrik didn't just conquer with blade and poison. He spread terror through theatrics. In the blackened halls of the Whisper Blood clan, he staged a mock vision from the Horned Rat. A skink shaman, captured weeks earlier, was mutated with warp flu until he bubbled and screamed like a daemon. Verrik interpreted its madness as prophecy, a divine omen that Rask Moonfang was the true Claw, chosen by divine will. See, the Horned One speaks, spits from monster throat, he chooses me." The Whisper Bloods, terrified and trembling, threw down their arms and offered their best breeders as tribute. He accepted, then executed the breeders, and said they were too impure for his vision. And with every band absorbed, Verrik expanded his reach. The Moonfang Clawhold now held 4 minor dens, 3 crater burrows, and a stretch of tunnels that once belonged to a splintered pestilence sect. He set up hidden caches of warpstone, built slave pens, reinstated flesh melding as punishment. He formed the Fangborn, an elite claw of his most savage killers, many of whom had been rivals before he broke them in combat or crushed their minds with toxin. His banners were etched into stone and bone alike, each painted with screaming faces, torn-out eyes, or the dripping maws of conquered enemies. But success breeds attention and envy. Rumors began to curl through the wasteland like smoke from a hidden fire. Moonfang grows fat, grows strong, too strong. His war bands raid deeper, closer to the border, to the cities. Rask has warpstone veins. Machines, beasts. Maybe he's not Rask at all. Old Whisper returned louder than all the others. Maybe Verrik still lives, lurks. Verrik, Rask, heard the whispers. He didn't flinch. He fed them. He spread false leads, staged mock executions of Verrik sympathizers, sent spies dressed in the old Eshin style to die in public trials, squealing lies written in his own hand. One even cried out, "I saw Verrik. He plots against Rask." The crowd tore him apart with claws and teeth. Verrik watched, smiling beneath his mask. But in the solitude of his den, in the heart of a warren carved from the ribcage of a buried wyrm, Verrik stood before a bone mirror. He stared at his own reflection. Verrik is dead. Rask is warlord. Rask is real. But the mirror said nothing, just watched with eyes that were his. Chapter 9. Echoes of the Knife. Sleep was poison, and Verrik drank it nightly, choking on memories. He dreamed of that night, the one that should have birthed glory but instead begot the long, festering rot that gnawed his name down to nothing. A night of shadows and silence, of triumph turned sour, of blood that failed to still a heartbeat. In the dream he saw the assassin's blade, his own blade, gleaming in the dark like a promise. The target, Screek, warlord brute, traitor to Eshin law. A marked kill. The shadows curled around Verrik as he approached. His feet whispered over ancient stone. His breath was shallow, practiced. Screek stood before the sacrificial altar, back turned, arms raised in prayer to the horned rat, ignorant of his impending death. Verrik struck. Steel-bit flesh. The blade slid deep into the jugular, just as trained. Blood fountained in arterial arcs. Screek choked, gurgled. Verrik twisted the blade and leaned in close to whisper. Fade to now. No afterlife for failure. But then Screek's eye twitched. Not the twitch of death. The twitch of knowing. A subtle, maddening spasm. A warning. A smile curled on the corpse's lips as it crumpled. A lie hidden in the moment of death. Verrik awoke screaming. His claws shredded the furs he slept on. Sweat soaked his body, the mask suffocating him like a second skin. His war captains dared not speak of the sounds that echoed from his den at night. They feared their warlord was haunted. He was. By day Verrik functioned. He barked orders, planned raids, harvested warpstone, executed dissenters. His banner rose higher. His warband grew fatter on spoils and fear. But he no longer saw victories. Only shadows. The knife twitch. The eye twitch. The smile. He began to stalk his own spies. Silent-footed, cloaked in war fog and paranoia, he slithered through the camps and warrens at night, watching them whisper, watching them plot. He slashed the throat of a courier just to see what messages bled from his pockets. He found nothing. He disemboweled a scout captain and searched his entrails for sigils or runes or signs of treachery. Still nothing. The corpse still twitched, gurgled as if trying to smile. Verrik turned on his own shadowmasters, the whisper agents he'd recruited to report on the moods of his warband. He summoned them one by one to his chambers. Warm, glowing green with warp flame. A false comfort. The first arrived, bowing low. Great Warlord Rask, I bring tale speak from... He never finished. Verrik lunged and pinned him to the floor, claws digging into throat and jaw. With calm, almost religious focus, he peeled back the rat's snout, slicing away the skin in precise, practiced lines. What do you see? See behind my back, Verrik whispered. The agent screamed until he couldn't. Verrik left his flayed corpse nailed to the war hall gate. The rest confessed anything Verrik wanted. Yes, yes, Screek lips. Yes, yes, he walks the tunnels. Yes, yes, the council watches. Yes, yes, we plot, but only because we feared you knew. He drowned them anyway, chained, poisoned, or flayed in front of their peers. One he fed to a warp spawn, still breathing. Another he skinned and wore as a second mask for an entire day. The Moonfang warband obeyed more tightly than ever. But they watched him differently now. Not with awe, with terror. And still, in the silence, Verrik heard the voice. Twitch, twitch, Verrik, you saw me die, but I breathe still. And in the darkest corners of the Moonfang den, when no eyes were upon him, Verrik whispered back, I'll fix it this time. Then he'd draw his blade and stab shadows. Chapter 10. Screaming Bell Tolls. The message came in a black tube made from bone and rune-etched warp steel, carried by a plague rat missing half its face. The parchment inside was scrawled in Skaven claw runes so jagged they bled when read aloud. Warlord Rask of Moonfang Clawhold, assemble forces, march nest with main host of Under-Empire, screaming bell tolls, war beckons. Destination, Karag Vorgast. A dwarf hold fat with treasure shine, kill, take, glory. At the bottom a seal pressed in rotting wax, a stylized claw, wreathed in shadows. Glen Ishin. Verrik stared at it for a long time. His claws twitched. His tail coiled and uncoiled in the dirt like a thing possessed. A dwarf hold? Rich? Maybe, but why now? Why him? Moonfang had grown. Too fast, too bold. His warband was no longer a minor power but a threat, and threats, in Skaven culture, are trimmed, not tolerated. This was not a call to glory. It was a knife dressed as honor. Still, he had no choice. Refusal was treason. Obvious treason. And Verrik already walked on the razored edge of suspicion. So he gathered the warband, 1,500 strong now, a seething tide of black-furred killers, flayers, poisoners, and flesh rats. Siege engines scraped from scrap metal were dragged by snarling rat ogres stitched together with rune twine and madness. Warp globadiers squealed and preened, checking their alchemical bombs, while gutter runners twitched like insects in the shadows. He ordered the Moonfang banner repainted with fresh blood, the moon eclipsing the claw, always watching, always sharp. Then he marched. The war host rendezvoused in the rotting canyon of Barak Nash. Thousands of Skaven milled in mad formations, clans Wormsnare, Rotfang, Splinterclaw, even banners from Moulder and a cursed splinter of Pestilence. The air choked with war gas, plague fumes, and the shrill screeches of ritual slaughter. In the center of it all stood the screaming bell. 3 stories tall, made of corroded brass and bone, lashed to the backs of chained rat ogres. Runes glowed across its surface like boils, and atop it perched a gray seer, robed in disease rags and leaking light from his sockets. When it tolled, the sound wasn't heard, it was felt. Inside bones, inside brains. The first toll rang as Moonfang arrived. Verrik fell to his knees, claws clutching his ears, bile dripping from his nose. Visions swam before him, Screek's face, twisted and laughing, leering from inside the bell's mouth. His warband shuddered, but held. Others did not. One nearby pestilence priest fell writhing, his body bursting into warp flame as his tongue grew mouths and screamed until the mouths screamed too. Verrik rose with shaking limbs and eyes that saw ghosts. A hooded figure approached. Rasko Leder, the figure hissed. A messenger. Clan Eshin. Council says you lead vanguard strike. First into dwarf tunnels. Great honor, yes. Yes. Verrik stared. Honor. A burial. No one returned from dwarf vanguard assaults. The traps. The fire. The steel. He nodded anyway. Yes, yes. Moonfang leads. Horned One wills it. The messenger bowed and did not leave. Verrik narrowed his eyes. The messenger leaned close, his breath sharp with nightshade. He knows, Verrik. He waits. Then he vanished into the shadows. That night, Verrik summoned his top claw captains. He outlined the assault strategy, drew maps, marked kill points, chokeholds, fallback burrows. But in secret, he laid alternate paths for retreat, poisoned the water for any other clan trying to follow Moonfang, planted warp bombs on the rear guard should betrayal come from behind. If this was a grave, he would fill it with others first. The march to Carag Vorgast began under a sky tainted green. Skaven chanted. The bell tolled. The mountain loomed ahead, black and cruel, its doors carved in grim faces of bearded defiance. Inside, dwarfs waited, and Verrik's blade was ready, but so were theirs. Chapter 11. Blood in the Deep Hall. Carag Vorgast loomed ahead like a corpse mountain, its gate a snarling dwarfen face with iron teeth and murder in its eyes. The Skane armies gathered in squirming formation beneath it, chittering, clawing, swarming like fleas on rot meat. From the screaming bell the grey seer shrieked in warp tongue, his staff crackling with green lightning. The ground shook with the power of his blasphemous rites. Verrik stood at the front, wrapped in his barbed cloak, helm shaped like a rat skull fused with jagged bronze. Beside him, his fang-born elites scraped their blades across the stones, itching for blood. Behind them, Clan Wormsnare's bloated warlord Snark Halfjaw snorted dismissively. Your front rank? You? Pah! Better to leave you in the corpse piles. Least then you'd be useful. Verrik turned slowly. He smiled, and marked Snark for death. The tunnels were death traps. The dwarfs, ever stubborn, had turned every corridor into a killing zone. Lava trenches boiled beneath trapdoors. Runes exploded with concussive fury when touched. Iron statues spat shrapnel and flame. Thunderers from behind shield walls cut down wave after wave of skittering vermin. But Verrik moved like a whisper through the carnage. He scouted side paths, found a rusted vent shaft beneath a carved ancestral altar. Inside, he planted his own sabotage. 2 powder barrels, stolen from a scryer engineer the night before. A poisoned rune made from warpstone shards. He marked the shaft on a map, then gave that map to Snurk's lieutenants. The Wormsnare rats charged the flank. They followed Verrik's map with pride and anticipation, thinking they would flank the dwarfs and win glory. They triggered the rune. The explosion shook the entire deep hall. Hundreds died in an instant, fur, steel, and meat flung against stone like filth in a storm. Screams echoed endlessly. The flank collapsed, but the Moonfang rats surged through the chaos. They poured in through ruptured walls and shattered defenses. Verrik led from the front, his blades wet with dwarfen blood, his cloak in flames, his laughter slicing through the smoke. He found the dwarf-hold's hearthroom, where their elders made last stands. He slit a greybeard's throat with a whip blade and laughed into the old dwarf's dying eyes. You fall fail to vermin, proud stone ceased. Die ashamed. The dwarfs fought to the last, but they were outnumbered, exhausted, surrounded. The hold fell. Afterward, the Skaven celebrated in gore. They dragged dwarf corpses into heaps and burned them alive. Slaves were chained, runes defiled. The halls rang with screeches of victory and madness. But questions came too. Will Snark's flank boom? Why so many die? Verrik stood atop the hearthstone, soaked in blood, tail twitching. Snark betray plan, charged too early, died as fool failings do. He held up a burned rune map, partially intact. Proof. Lies, deeds. He walked us to death. We survive. We win. Hornrat favors me. The crowd howled, "Agreed!" Memory faded fast in victory. Snurk's lieutenants were fed to the warpfire pits. Verrik knelt that night in the deepest vault of the hold, surrounded by slain dwarf children, their tiny skulls arranged in a crude crown before him. He whispered, "Screek, you watch? See now, I win. I survive. I burn flood halls with blood. You rot in shadows." But the scowls didn't answer. Only the silence did. And Verrik thought, for just a breath, he saw an eye twitch. One last time. Chapter 12. The Rat King's Offer. The tunnels of Karag Vorgast still stank of charred dwarf, blood-slick stone, and molten death. Skaven danced and fed in the halls, gnawing on armored limbs, burning shrines with warp oil and laughter. But Verrik remained alone in the vault, sharpening his claws beside a pile of still-steaming dwarf skulls. Then came the messenger. It slithered from the dark, a creature of ragged fur and broken symmetry. One eye glowed with green fire, the other hung loose from a sinew strand. Its back pulsed with fleshy tumors that writhed like rats within. It bowed deeply, voice wet and serpentine. "Warlord Rask, greetings from High Things Reckle of Molderness Deep." Verrik did not rise, only twitched. "Molder Thing sends greetings?" The mutant bowed again, drool stringing from its half-mouth. "He offers gift, alliance, power, and safety. Protection from council claws. In trade he wants live things." Verrik's tail lashed. "Slaves? Better, captives, war spoils, traitors." The messenger reached into its gutsack and threw a bone scroll at Verrik's feet. It unfurled with a sickening snap. Drawings, diagrams, madness. Flesh grafted to metal, bone fused with rat ogre muscle, eyes sewn onto tails, a Skaven's head bursting open to reveal another mouth. "This molder science," the messenger wheezed. "Zerkel makes monsters from dead things, from living traitors. He gives back nightmare beasts for your enemies." Verrik stared at the parchment. His mind twisted around the idea. Use rivals not just for execution, but transformation. Turn threats into tools. Let his enemies scream their way into usefulness. Let fear spread through the ranks. He smiled beneath his mask. "Tell Zarako, yes, I accept." That night, Verrik called a feast. Warbands gathered in the deep hall, now painted with gore and hung with dwarf faces like meat masks. He raised cups of spoiled dwarf ale, poison just enough to loosen tongues. "Glory to Moonfang, glory to us." They howled. He watched. They drank. He listened. He heard names, whispers, boasts. Fangborn grow too strong. Rask hides secrets. Some say Verrik lives. Verrik smiled. Later he summoned 8 captains to a private meeting. Only 5 came. The other 3 already chained. He greeted them with politeness, even warmth. "You loyal, yes, then prove. Drink from my cup." They hesitated. He nodded. Good, I thought not." From the shadows, a pack of Clan Molder wranglers emerged, wearing stitched flesh coats and eyes glowing green. They clamped irons around the captains' necks, dragging them off as they shrieked and begged. "No, please, for the Horned One's tail, mercy." Verrik stepped forward and whispered into one captain's twitching ear. "Your bones will walk in my name." Over the coming weeks, Moonfang warbeasts began to emerge. Twisted things with Skaven faces, extra arms and mechanical limbs powered by warpstone. One bore the melted features of a former lieutenant, still alive, fused into the side of a rat ogre, whispering madly from a second mouth sewn into its chest. The Moonfang soldiers watched these beasts with terror and loyalty. Fear was sharper than hope, and in the heart of the deep hall, Verrik stood alone again, reading another scroll from Zrako, his tail twitching. "More gifts to come," it said. "Soon, Warlord Verrik may rise higher, maybe even Council Caller." Verrik did not laugh, but his blades gleamed brighter. Chapter 13. Screek's Shadow. The deep hall had grown darker in recent days. Not from lack of torches, those still blazed, casting green light on flayed banners and screaming skulls, but from something older, something beneath the stones. A chill, a pulse, a presence. Verrik felt it. He slept less, ate less, sharpened his blades more. He thought it was just the usual. Paranoia, shadows speaking, dreams twisting, but then the signs began to pile. Too real, too precise. It began with a corpse. One of Verrik's scouts, skilled, silent, and trusted, as much as a Skaven could be, found in the stone tunnels east of the hold. His throat was opened with surgical precision, yet not bled out. Instead, a message was carved into his chest. Not dead. Still sees. No signature, no sigil, but Verrik knew. He stared at the corpse for hours. His fingers trembled, his tail curled so tight it cut circulation. He ordered it boiled, then crushed the bones himself. Then came the blades. 3 assassins, Eshin-trained, blade-fanged, and silent, caught infiltrating a supply tunnel. They moved like shadows, bore no markings, and fought like fanatics. One gnawed out his own tongue rather than speak. Another exploded with a rune. The third survived. Barely. Verrik peeled his skin with surgical patience, whispering as he worked. "Who sent you? Speak, or squeal while your nerves burn." The assassin gasped through shredded lips. "Returns. Unfinished kill. Must end finish." "Oh!" The assassin laughed, blood gurgling up his throat. Screek. Then Verrik slit his belly and fed him to the chittering flesh rats. He didn't sleep that night. He watched. Sat still on his bone throne, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond his war torch. The shadows writhed. The air pulsed. He imagined he heard the scrape of claws across stone, deliberate, slow, taunting. He dug his claws into his own thigh to keep focus. Screek lived. Worse, Screek hunted. By morning, Verrik summoned his inner circle. The Fangborn sat before him, silent and tense. They felt it too. "The one you thought dead," Verrik said. "The one I told you was gone. He comes, with kill blades and vengeance sickness. He whispers to Eshin, now. They believe him." His voice cracked, but not with fear, with fury. "They doubt me, after all I carved, burned, killed." He pounded his claws into the stone until they bled. "I want him found, dug up from holes, dragged out from rot nests, dead. His body brought here, bones shattered, heart eaten." The Fangborn nodded, but their eyes flickered. Doubt, fear, maybe, loyalty shifting. Verrik saw it. He memorized their faces. Soon, reports flooded in, Eshin activity increasing in nearby warrens, disappearances, high-ranking Moonfang officers vanishing in the night, a plague priest gutted and strung from his own bell chain. No evidence. No trace. Except one thing, a symbol. A jagged line through a rat's skull. The old brand of Screek. Old but freshly carved. Verrik ordered a purge. 20 suspected spies were hauled out from the ranks, real or imagined. His own flesh scientists tore them open, searching for tracking runes, poison glands, or council seals. Some were innocent. Better dead than wrong. Then one night Verrik stood alone in his war den, staring into the fire. The flames shifted, shaped, a face, twisted, scarred, grinning. One red eye burned like a forge, and it winked. Verrik screamed, lashed out, shattered everything, until only the echo of his own ragged breath remained. He fell to his knees, shaking, foaming, whispering, "Screek lives. Screek wants me." Chapter 14. The False Plague. The deep hall trembled beneath Verrik's feet, not from quake or battle, but from the weight of dread. Not just his own, but something spreading, seething through the Moonfang ranks. Screek was no longer a ghost whispered in nightmares. He had become a truth, a shadow that breathed, killed, and gathered. And Verrik, for all his lies, blades, and screams, felt cornered. So he did what the Skaven do best. He turned his terror into a weapon. The plan was born in the deepest pit of his mind, a foul little corner where cruelty festered. It would have made a human weep, a dwarf rage, a pestilent monk laugh. He would create a plague, a false one, a lie clothed in rot, and coughs and screaming death. Not real, but real enough. He needed fear to shift, doubt to scatter, and blame to point away from him. He needed clan pestilence to be the scapegoat. He began in secret. From his alliance with Mulder, Verrik obtained disease flesh, bio-warped muscle matter from a failed lab experiment. Not infectious, but stinking, the kind of meat that twitched after death and bled green pus. He had it ground, boiled, laced with crushed warp spores and corpse rot. Then he had it fed into the water tunnels below the sleeping warrens, where his own troops drank, bathed, gnawed on filth. Next came the actors, flesh slaves warped with alchemical sores. He planted them throughout the hold. Each staggered through the halls, coughing, retching bile, foaming from their snouts. Then they died. Loudly, publicly, screaming plague and plague, pestilence, as Verrik's own poison gnawed their hearts apart. The effect was instant. Panic spread like a fire on grease. Clawfangs tore their own fur out, some gouged out their eyes, others tried to burn their dens. The screams echoed for hours. Verrik emerged like a prophet. Cloaked in ash, mask cracked for dramatic effect, he stood atop the bone altar and howled. Pestus tricked us, sicked us. The horned rat test loyals with poison, false faith. We were strong, they were weak, weak so they plague us, dab at us. The warband rallied behind him in a frenzy of fear and fury. They needed someone to blame, and Verrik gave it to them. To sell the lie further, Verrik executed 3 of his own plague priests. They were low rank, loyal, and ignorant. Perfect. He had them dragged into the central square, chained in rusted metal. Each was stripped, smeared in pus, and tested before the crowd, before Verrik gutted them one by one, howling about their contaminated curses. One screamed until his own intestines dangled from his teeth. The crowd cheered. Then came the fire. Whole sections of the deep hall, dens, tunnels, breeding pits, were cleansed in warp flame. Dozens perished, some innocent, some loud, some simply unlucky. All were useful. Verrik sent word to the nearest pestilence enclave, demanding tribute and plague reparations, and accusing them of heresy. He made the letters smell of sickness, made sure several messengers died screaming before arrival. Pestilence did not respond, but they noticed. The council would hear of it, and not of Screek. Perfect. That night, Verrik sat alone, mask off, claws twitching. He stared at his own reflection in the black water basin, breathing shallow, eyes rimmed in red. He had fooled them again, even himself. Almost. because when he blinked, he saw Screek in the water. Not reflection, but visage, grinning, waiting, watching. Chapter 15. Fangs and Whispers. The Moonfang Clawhold was no longer a secret. It had become a legend. Across the wastelands, through the ruined burrows and smoke-pitted tunnels of the Under-Empire, rats spoke in frantic tones of Warlord Rask, of Verrik, though none dared say the name aloud. They whispered of his warfang beasts, skaven fused with rat ogres, stitched with blades and fed warp drugs, until they wept blood and screamed praise to the horned rat. They whispered of the fall of Vorgast, of the false plague, of the flesh pits, of fear. Verrik had become more than a warlord, he had become a myth. But in Skaven culture, myths are not worshipped. They are watched, measured, dissected, and then erased. It began with the crows. Warp crows, mutated, featherless birds with glowing green eyes and human-like tongues sewn into their beaks, started appearing in the upper caverns. They did not speak, they only watched, silent, staring, judging. Verrik ordered them hunted. His gutter runners caught one and tore it open. Inside they found a scroll sealed in brass. From the council, 7 words written in blood. You climb high, perhaps too high. He burned the scroll. He burned the croch. Then he flayed the rat, who opened the scroll aloud. But it didn't stop. Whispers followed him now like fleas. His own guards muttered behind masks. Council sees. Council tests. Reward or blade? The phrase wormed into Verrik's thoughts like a maggot into a corpse. Reward or blade? He paced his throne room, a cracked dwarfen vault now adorned in stitch skins and warpstone lanterns. Dozens of skulls lined the floor, enemies, followers, and those who had annoyed him with too much eye contact. He could feel the weight pressing in. Every torch flicker became a figure. Every shadow Screek's grin. He turned his knives on his own war-seers, demanding omens. One showed him a pool of blood that reflected his face as a corpse. Another vomited black bile, then croaked, They call you to sit or bleed. That one he boiled alive in war fuel. Still he listened. He sent out spies, and they returned with confirmation. A message. Council summons Warlord Rask. Arrival mandatory. Cause not stated. That was all. No honorifics, no titles, no threats. But implied death reeked from every word. Verrik stood before his elite that night, surrounded by warfangs breathing steam, eyes stitched shut, but seeing too much. He spoke low, almost reverent. They watch, they weigh. He dragged a dagger across his own arm and let the blood steam into the warp flame. They think me beast dog on chain, but I wear the leash no longer. His warriors bowed, but none smiled, because none knew if they would live to see the next week. And in the deepest part of his private chamber, far from all others, Verrik spoke aloud. To the shadows, to the whispers, of Screek, if I am called, I will answer, with blade. He laughed, then stopped, because somewhere behind the wall, beneath the floor, he heard a voice. It whispered, Reward or blade? Chapter 16. The Black Call. The summons came on a page made from flayed skin, still warm, still twitching. It was carried by a centipede with a skaven face sewn to its back, the eye sockets stuffed with warpstone shards. It crawled across the feast table during Verrik's war council, coiling between meat bones and twitching tongues, hissing in a language that wasn't quite speech. Verrik snatched it mid-slither and crushed it with a sickening crunch. Then he read the words etched into the skin. Council calls, Come, come, no delay, no excuse, no escape. His claws trembled. Skaven Blight, the black heart of the Under-Empire, the seat of the horned rat's will, the place where blades were drawn in greeting and poison was the currency of respect. To be summoned there, unasked, was the greatest of honors and the most elaborate of death sentences. Verrik returned to his den that night, alone. He stripped off his armor, let the cool cave air bite into the scars. The mask lay beside him like a second face. He stared into the reflection of a black mirror carved from obsidian and cracked warglass. The face that looked back was not Rask, not the warlord, not the prophet. It was Verrik, the failure, the knife that missed, the name he had buried in flame and death. He whispered to the glass, "Did you call me back, Screeky? Are you behind the mirror now? Now?" Nothing replied, but the silence grinned. The next morning Verrik moved like a storm. He summoned his finest armorers, torturers, alchemists. "Make me feared, make me a monster. I go to the pit mouth itself. I must outshine all others, even in death." They worked without rest. They reforged his armor, scraps of dwarfen plate fused with warp steel veins, embossed with screaming runes. His mask was replaced, now a split face, half snarling rat, half empty bone socket, bleeding mist. His tail was tipped with a blade. His claws were injected with venom. His blood thickened, with anti-poison serums so vile even the warlocks gagged when mixing them. He killed 3 tailors for not meeting expectation. His warband stood in terrified reverence when he emerged. Even the Warfangs backed away. He was no longer Rask. He was something worse, something that had crawled back from failure and built a throne from it. Verrik addressed them only once before departure. "Skaven Blight waits. Council judges, but they forget. We are Moonfang now. We do not beg, we bite. If I return, I bring power. If I do not—" He paused, smiled behind the mask. "Then begin carving new leaders from your own backs." They howled in fear. Praise. Verrik left the next dusk. He took no honor guard. Only his blade priests, 2 warp-mutated warpfangs, and a litter of bound slaves. Not for protection, but for display. Let the council smell blood on him. Let them see he still fed. As he passed beyond the outer tunnels, he looked back once. At Moonfang, at the kingdom he'd birthed in betrayal, bone, and bile. He didn't feel pride. He felt something worse. Hope. Skaven Blight's scent hit him long before its sight. Rot, metal, warp, madness. The city pulsed beneath the ground like a blister too swollen to pop. The screaming bells tolled in the distance, and the sky above wept blood rain. Verrik's pace never slowed. He was going back to where it all began, where Screek died, where Verrik failed, and where a throne or a tomb waited. Chapter 17. Eyes of the Horned Rat. The chamber doors groaned open like the jaws of some ancient subterranean god, hungry, hateful, and eager to devour. The darkness beyond didn't recede under the warp flame torches. It swallowed light and spat back something older. Verrik stepped forward, his warfangs growling low behind him, tail arched, claws itching beneath his ceremonial gloves. His armor clinked like chains dragged across bone. The air itself hissed with anticipation. This was the Hall of 13, the seat of ultimate Skaven power, a cathedral of treachery. The domed ceiling vanished into smoke. The black stone floor bore the symbols of each of the great clans, engraved in warp steel and smeared with centuries of dried blood. And at the far end, 13 thrones carved from obsidian, bone, and screaming metal. 11 were filled. too, were cloaked in shadow, and behind them, floating above the council's dais, a warped effigy of the horned rat, its many eyes glowing, weeping foul light that made Verrik's fur itch. He stopped at the blood circle and knelt. "Rask Moonfang," hissed a voice, high, slithering, laced with amusement and poison. One of the council rats leaned forward, a robed monstrosity from Clan Scryer, its face obscured behind metal and warp lenses. "You were summoned. You have risen. But have you earned or stolen?" Another leaned in, a pestilence priest reeking of disease. "Have you climbed or crawled?" Verrik bowed deeper. "I bring gifts of conquest, warpstone, slaves, spoils, all in your name, great, great council." He gestured. The chained slaves behind him were shoved forward, stripped, bloodied, trembling. The Warfangs roared, snapping jaws inches from their necks. One council member chuckled, and others spit. "Proof. He kills well. So do many. Why are you still alive, Rasrat?" That voice, deep, familiar. Verrik froze. His eyes rose slowly. From behind one of the shadowed thrones, he stepped forward. Clad in blackened bone armor, eyes burning with crimson spite, his jaw scarred, his throat thick with brutal ritual stitches. A smile cut into one side of his face, like a wound that had learned to enjoy pain. Screek. Alive. Not just alive, elevated. A member of the council? No, not yet, but close. Too close. Verrik's blood went cold. Screek spoke, voice rasping like torn parchment. "Do you know this rat council, Saris? This blade licker here?" Some on the council turned, curious. Screek continued, calm, measured, cruel. "This one claimed to kill me, cut my throat, left me in the dark, bleeding, choking, alone." He tugged the collar of his armor down, revealed the scar, a horrid, spiraled wound still faintly leaking green. It didn't finish the job. Screek stepped closer, circling Verrik like a predator. Imagine that. An Eshin who fails, not traitor, not coward, just not enough. The council murmured, their eyes flicked from Screek to Verrik and back again. Calculations spun behind every whisker. Verrik rose, slowly, claws out but not drawn. "I struck the death blow, saw you fall. You cheated death, not I. I am not coward, you are undead. A thing that should not breathe." Screek grinned wider. "You sound scared, Verrik." The name echoed. The council froze. Silence. Verrik said nothing, did not deny it. It could not. A voice from the shadows, the high voice of Eshin, rasped. "So, the failure returns, in new name, new skin, wearing false mask, false triumph. You burn dwarf holds, poison kin, deceive all." A pause. Is this ambition or treason? The thrones shifted, whispered, argued in sibilant tones too fast to follow. Verrik's claws ached, his mind screamed. His eyes locked on Screek's. Screek stared back with that impossible calm, that knowing. A flicker of movement. A wink. The voice of the horned rat stood. The chamber fell silent. "Veragrask, Moonfang. You rise like bile from corpse mouth. You kill, you scheme, you thrive." A pause. "You are dangerous." Another pause. "We must decide." Chapter 18. Trial of the Knife. The council chamber was a wound cut into the heart of Skaven Blight. Its stone dripped with condensation and blood, both old and fresh. Carvings of the horned rat twisted in agony and ecstasy along every wall, glowing with faint warp runes that whispered when no one spoke. Above, the screaming bell let out intermittent throbs of sound, echoes of madness and time collapsing in on itself. Verrik stood in the blood circle once more, his claws at his side, armor heavy with heat. His tail twitched in patterns of panic he tried to hide. Opposite him, Screek stood tall, arms folded behind his back, the scar on his throat livid and pulsing faintly with warp corruption. His presence was coiled like a spring, calculated, sharp, deadly. The high voice of Eshin stepped forward from the central throne, robes rustling like dead skin. "You are summoned here, Rask Verrik, not to speak squeak nonsense, but to answer. You failed, claimed death, but death speaks now." He gestured to Screek, who smiled and inclined his head, mocking. "Your kill claim false. Your rise, built on lie. Your leadership perhaps not real. He leaned in. Verrik didn't flinch. Not on the outside. Inside, every nerve screamed, every instinct told him to run, to kill, to burn the council and let the Under-Empire drown in blood. But instead he bowed his head, just enough to show deference, without submission. I saw the target fall, blade true, cut throat through, blood sprayed, eye dimmed. It was no misfail. He died. Gasps, murmurs, eyes twitched and turned. Verrik continued, voice rising, shaking with conviction. But rose after was not Screek, was something else, twisted by warp taint, made puppet thing, some creature of hate-fueled vengeance. He pointed at Screek. The thing wears Screek's skin, but is not Screek. Silence. Then a crack of laughter, rough, harsh, mocking. Screek stepped forward. Pathetic. He gestured to his scarred throat. "This? You call this a puppet? This is what you gave me, Verrik. You left me to die in filth, thinking you'd climbed over my corpse." He spat. A glob of bile hit the floor and sizzled. "I lived, I bled, I clawed through stone with nubs for fingers, and I remembered every lie squeak you uttered as I crawled back to the surface." His eyes flared. "You ran. You hid. You lied. I never needed puppets, Verrik, only time." The council buzzed like a nest disturbed. One from Clan Skryre hissed. "If Screek lived, how do we know Verrik did not plot eye with him, then betray?" Another from Mulder rasped. "Or maybe Verrik struck true, and Screek is now not whole." A daemon warp-born echo. A pestilence priest vomited green onto his own feet and mumbled, "All lies, purge both." The high voice snapped his claw, silencing them. He turned to Verrik again. "You are cunning, but so are all who fear. What proof have you this is not just a survivor, not a revenant?" Verrik bared his teeth. "I offer flesh truth. Take his blood, test it, feed it to warp beasts, let Mulder dissect his heart." He gestured toward Screek. "I bet his soul screams wrong." Screek growled. "I offer blade proof." He lunged. The council erupted in screams. Screek's dagger hissed through the air, a poisoned sliver aimed straight for Verrik's jugular. But Verrik was faster. He pivoted, cloak spinning, drawing one of his warp fangs in a reverse grip and slashing upward in the same breath. Steel kissed steel. Both rats recoiled, blades dripping not blood but venom, each just barely dodging death. The council howled with excitement. Yes, knife trial. Let blade choose truth. Skaven tradition, old ways. The high voice raised both arms. Enough. Silence fell again, like a hammer on bone. This is no pit duel. This is council trial. We watch, weigh. Your blood will not fall here. He glared at both. Not yet. Both Verrik and Screek withdrew, slowly. Eyes locked. Minds racing. Each now knew the other had climbed too far to fall easily. One of them would die. But not here. Not yet. That night, Verrik returned to his holding cell beneath the council chambers. He sharpened his blades by candlelight, muttering to himself. He still breathes, but not for long. Above, the screaming bell tolled. It sounded almost like a laugh. Chapter 19, Rise or Ruin. The council chamber echoed with venom. 13 thrones hissed, screeched, argued, words sharpened like blades flung through the dark. Spittle flew, tails lashed, claws clinked on obsidian armrests. The screaming bell tolled again, casting tremors through the chamber like a heartbeat of doom. At the center of it all, Verrik stood with his head bowed slightly, an image of deference, posture rigid, yet coiled with anticipation. His eyes flicked to each throne, memorizing gestures, assessing threats. His enemies argued louder. He lies. He tried, killed, council brother. He is chosen. He is cursed. Too much power. Too much fear. Screek sat at the side, calm, smirking, his black claws clicking slowly against the edge of his bone-armored thigh. The scar on his throat pulsed with each toll of the bell. He said nothing now. He watched, just as Verrik had planned. The high voice stood, tail lashing. Enough. We weigh, we speak. The horned rat watches. His fingers twitched to signal the council guards. That was the moment. Verrik smiled and triggered chaos. A warp bomb hidden beneath the throne of the pestilence priest exploded first, green fire erupting upward, incinerating his form in a flash of rot and screeching agony. Flesh sizzled from his bones. Diseased fumes washed over the chamber. Then came the scream globes. Tossed by Verrik's hidden acolytes, agents of the Fangborn dressed as servants, now armed with blades and bombs. The globes shattered mid-air, unleashing clouds of nerve gas that turned breathing into slaughter. Council guards twisted and spasmed, eyes bleeding from sockets, bones cracking inward. A Warpfang, hidden in a false wall, burst forth, its limbs tipped with rusted cleavers, stitched with the skin of former captains. It carved through 2 council guards before being riddled with warp bolts. A second assassin, face-masked, leapt directly for Screek. Verrik's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "The council falls! Horns to me!" The chamber erupted. Skaven leapt from balconies, either to kill or flee. Warp rats poured from ventilation grates. Poisoned blades flashed in the torchlight. One counselor from Clan Scry tried to activate a teleport rune switch, only to have his arm sliced off mid-mation by Verrik himself. Verrik spun through the carnage, blade in each hand, cloak trailing fire. He moved like vengeance itself, striking not at foes, but at uncertainty. He severed alliances with steel, he silenced doubts with poison. One moment he was cutting down a council guard, the next he was dragging a muttering Molder lieutenant into the path of a warp bolt. The screams built into a chorus. But Screek did not die. He fought. Oh, he fought. Blades spun from his hands like whirlwinds, warping into tendrils of warp taint. He deflected the assassin, gutted one Fangborn, leapt across the blood-slick floor and pinned Verrik against a pillar. Their blades locked. Desperate, Screek snarled. "You know you're already dead," Verrik hissed. "I'll burn you this time, there won't be anything left to rise." He twisted, kicked Screek in the knee, and drove a poisoned shard into his ribs. Screek howled and fell back, but not dead. Not yet. The bell tolled again. The chamber, now half destroyed, burned and bled. A third of the thrones were empty. A quarter of the guards were twitching wrecks. A handful of Verrik's agents stood victorious, bloodied but alive. Silence returned. Broken, shattered, unholy. And in that silence, Verrik stood in the center of the carnage. Mask half burnt, armor slick with blood not his own, surrounded by ruin, but standing. From the shadows, a voice whispered low. One of the remaining council. You live, you kill, you risk council death. Another joined in. But you show power, leadership, vision. The high voice, face blistered, eyes red with fury, rose slowly. You are not forgiven, but you are now known. A pause. Another toll. Perhaps you deserve to stand. Verrik bowed, smoke rising from his cloak. He didn't smile, but his eyes gleamed. Chapter 20. The Vermin Ascendant. Smoke hung thick as rock fog across the wreckage of the council chamber. Warp flames still danced along the walls, licking at the blood-soaked banners and melted runes. The once imposing thrones of the 13 stood cracked and crooked, some shattered, some empty, all soiled. The air stank of burnt fur, boiling blood, and fear. The Council of 13 had bled today. But one rat stood. Verrik, armor blackened, mask half melted to his face, emerged from a pile of scorched bodies with the gait of a god and the eyes of a murderer. His claws twitched as he dragged something heavy behind him, leaving a long red trail across the cracked stone floor. It was a head, still twitching, still bleeding, still grinning. Screek, or what was left of him. His skull had been shattered, crushed beneath Verrik's boot during the height of the coup, driven into the floor with all the fury Verrik could summon. The wound had caved in the entire left side of the rat's head. One eye popped like a boil, the jaw hung loose, the tongue was split. This time, Verrik made certain. He'd stabbed him 6 more times after that, then gouged out the remaining eye, then twisted the neck until bone and sinew screamed, then crushed it. Only then did he let go. Only then did he whisper, Now, you'll die right." The surviving council members, 7 in total, watched from scorched thrones or the shadows beyond. Most bore wounds. All bore doubt. But none could deny what they saw. One voice croaked. "Screek is finished." Another muttered, "Too many failed to stop you, too many feared you." A third leaned forward, eyes red, voice thin as poison mist. "Rask Verrik, for crimes of blood betrayal, council rupture, and blade rule, you are punished." A long pause. Damp. "With power." The high voice stood at last. "From this black day, let it be carved on stone and corpse alike, that Verrik Moonfang is named Warlord of the South Scars, Holder of Clawhold, Slaughterer of Dwarf Halls, Plague Breaker, Kill-Fanged." Murmurs of bitter approval echoed. None clapped, but none opposed, and in Skaven society that was equivalent to coronation. Later, in the lower tunnels, Verrik stood alone, staring at Screek's ruined corpse, impaled on a rusted spike outside the chamber gates. He said nothing. He didn't smile, but his tail flicked once. Victory. Yet in the shadows, just beyond the flicker of torchlight, something watched. A claw scraped softly on stone. A figure hunched and scarred, one ear missing, one eye gleaming green. One of Screek's lieutenants, long thought dead in the coup, now stalking tunnels with quiet fury. He whispered, voice brittle with hate. "Verrik." The paranoia began again. The silence twitched. The whispers returned. The kill would never be done. Not for a Skaven, not for Verrik.